Hey, I'm Amanda from Trifecta Fitness. We're proud to be Clarksville's new Get Fit headquarters. Trifecta Fitness is a state-of-the-art spin and strength training studio. Our spin studio is truly one of a kind in this area, complete with 20 state-of-the-art live fitness bikes and an incredible sound system. Our strength training is done in small groups of 6 or fewer, and all of our strength and spin classes are scalable for every level of experience. Come see us in the heart of Clarksville, just behind MAPCO at the corner of Old Trenton Road and Wilma Rudolph Boulevard. Call us for more info at 931-542-6265 or download our Trifecta Fitness app for a full list of upcoming classes.
In October 2019, Arlington, Texas was chosen to be the home of a new national museum, unlike any other. The National Medal of Honor Museum will be a unique home of military history. The 100,000 square foot museums will house exhibits, archives, and artifacts relating to the 3,500 U.S. troops who have been awarded the medal, the nation's highest honor for valor in combat. The museum will have 31,000 square feet of galleries dedicated to U.S. troops who have received the award. The museum CEO, former Navy SEAL and NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy, said the museum will focus on education as much as preservation. The building will have 5 areas dedicated to Medal of Honor winners from the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. The main gallery will be located in a central plaza under a 25,000 square foot slab of steel, which will appear to be suspended in midair. It will be supported by 5 pillars. Black Rifle Coffee is a corporate sponsor of the museum, as are the Dallas Cowboys. The museum's board also includes over a dozen major corporations and 6 Medal of Honor recipients, including David Bellavia, Patrick Brady, and Britt Slabinski. Army Staff Sergeant Bellavia was awarded the medal for clearing an entire house by himself on November 10, 2004, as a squad leader in support of Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq. He killed 4 enemy fighters and wounded a 5th in close quarters battle. Army Major General Brady flew and coordinated the evacuation of 51 seriously wounded men during a firefight in Vietnam in January 1968. Slabinski, a Navy SEAL chief and team leader, led a rescue team of SEALs during Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan in March 2002. Slabinski and his team flew to a mountaintop ambush site to rescue Petty Officer First Class Neil Roberts, who had fallen from the back of a helicopter. Slabinski led the team through almost constant combat against an entrenched Taliban force. Along with the board members, former presidents Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama serve as honorary directors. The museum is expected to open to the public in late 2024.
All right. Welcome back. MisFitNation. We are a show founded by a veteran and hosted by 2 veterans and a military spouse. Our mission is to get people to tell their story to the world. If you're an author, share your tips with the MisFitNation. If you're a musician or actor, our audience needs to know how they too can get into the business. Coaches, we love our coaches. Come on and share some of your tips with the MisFitNation to help them become better versions of themselves. If you're a corporate leader or an entrepreneur, come on and share how you did it and how hard you have fought for success. If you're a veteran, first responder, or Gold Star family, we would love to have you come on and just share your story with the MisFitNation. We always have time for you. If you're feeling down, alone, or starting to see the darkness, stop. Think about those who are around you. You are not alone. You will be missed. If you feel like your problems will be a burden to those in your inner circle or are embarrassed, dial 988. If you are a veteran, take option 1. We need you to keep pushing forward. Don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you're a new listener, welcome to the MisFitNation. Be sure to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast apps and also on our YouTube channel at @_MisFitNation. Subscribe and click the bell to keep you up to date with our latest episodes and all of our news. You can also find us on Heroes Media Group and About Face Radio. Now, let's get to the show. All right. Welcome Happy 4th of July to my listeners in the United States and my brothers and sisters who fought for this freedom. Last week, MisFitNation was live at NASCAR race in Nashville. As you walk around the infield, you see lots of booths and things out there that catch your eye or eye catchers to sell you something. One thing that caught our eye was a trailer. My brother and I walked over and seen the trailer with basically looked like a hearse on the side of it, and that drew us in. And there was knives on the table selling. Then there was an icon standing off to the left, this cowboy hat on. And we got to talking, and it was a great chat, dog. This man has served the better part of 3 decades in the United States Army in the Special Forces. He retired in 2015 and knew he had to keep doing stuff to give back. And he started an outstanding foundation, an organization called Check Event. And me and him are going to talk about this right now, his service, and of course Check Event as well. So without further ado, let's welcome U.S. Army Special Forces veteran and founder of Check Event, Michael Carmichael, to the MisFitNation. Welcome, brother.
That was a great intro, Rich. I hope I can live up to all that. Thank you very much.
I'm pretty sure you can and will. Like I told you in the green room, we were talking. I said I'll give you a little blurb, and I gave a little more than I said I was going to give there because I was pumped up when you automatically picked this day. And I said this is the perfect day for you to pick. It's like being born on the 4th of July. It's the best day for 2 veterans to get on here and chat about things that are going on in our community, the veteran community, and see how we together, 2 minds together, can maybe get things going in the right direction.
I love the opportunity. Thank you so much.
So, Mike, like I said, also, I'll give a little bit about you. If you can give a little more about yourself and as far back as you want to go to how you went through your choices of go to the SF and your steps when you came out to do what you're doing now with Check Event.
Absolutely. So I actually joined when I was 17. I was a junior in high school. I was joining the National Guard. Right. So I needed a note from my parents because I was a minor. And I also needed a note from my principal that said, yeah, he's on track to graduate. So I'm going to go ahead and sign this. I didn't join on my own accord. My best friends, Lance and Drew Beckert, came up to me out of the blue and they're like, hey, guess what we did? I had no clue because they were all over the place sometimes. But then they told me that they had joined the National Guard. And I was dumbfounded by it because we were juniors in high school. But they explained it to me, and then I commenced to teasing them incessantly for a couple of months until I realized I was going to be without my best friends the last summer before we grew up. So I ate crow. I talked to my parents, and they were agreeable to it. And I joined the Montana National Guard. That was in 1989. So we went to basic in 89, AIT in 1990 when Desert Shield started. And then we actually graduated AIT when Desert Shield and all of the deployments to Saudi Arabia had already started. So in that, because we belong to the state of Montana, not the United States Army, we got to go home. And I had never seen a basic training or AIT graduation surrounded by MPs, but ours was, because all of these men, I came in combat arms and there was no women then. So all of these men had joined in a peacetime army, but all of a sudden, all of that had changed. So no block leave, our families were allowed to come in and see us. But then these guys were shipped off to units around the world who were going to war. But me and my buddies got to go home to Montana State. And I'm not from a military family at all, Rich. Sorry about the light. My son's sitting here. So, I mean, I got an uncle who's a tank mechanic, but that's really the depth of my family's service. So when Desert Storm started, I dropped out of college. I went down and I enlisted. I was already MOS qualified to do what I was going to do, and went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then went straight overseas to Mannheim, Germany, with a follow-on mission to Kuwait. So that's how I got in. And of course, when I did go active duty, I asked my buddies. I told them, hey, guess what I did? Guess what I did? And then they're like, I don't know what. I told them that I went active duty, expecting them to follow me. I didn't want to be the Lone Ranger there. But I got to, man, you're crazy. What are you doing? So, I mean, my family didn't understand. I felt that was my calling. And it's kind of like was just out at the Travis Manion Foundation. So it's like their motto, if not me, then who? We all have a part to play in this thing. Yeah, there you go. So I joined the Army and I went regular Army in 1991 and went to the tail end of Desert Storm. I was stationed in Mannheim, Germany, and then at the end of my first reenlistment, I'm passionate about the water. I grew up with a pretty rough childhood, and the water really was my sanctuary because once a year for a week, I would get to go and spend it with my grandparents on the lake. So I wanted to reenlist to be an Army diver, right? And I did the whole packet, which included the Special Forces physical and all of the intrusions into the wrong spots that included. And then as I dropped my packet, they said I couldn't be a 00 Bravo because I was already E5. Wow. So I went in and I'm like, I'm not going to get that intrusion for nothing, right? So the only other place that you could need that is for Special Forces selection. I didn't really know much. Sure, I saw the movies and saw the postcards and the DFAC and stuff like that, and went in and I said, hey, when can I go to selection? The light will fix itself here in just a minute. So it was like, when can I go to selection? And then the crux of that whole process was the physical. So I dropped my physical on the guy's desk and he said, well, what are you doing in 3 weeks? So really without much train up or, I was a tanker before, so I wasn't used to the rucking and the small unit tactics and all of that. So I went and I finished selection, but actually I was a 21-day non-select over, of course, from my end, it was some silly stuff that ended me not getting selected. But then at the end of my debriefing, this captain asked me, did I want to come back? And I very thoughtfully considered that. And I said, yeah, I do want to come back. And it was because of the men that I had worked with and that I had never experienced that quality of people as I did in selection. So went back second time, stayed with it, stayed operational, did 12 years team time on an ODA, 6 as an enlisted, and then I became a warrant and did 6 more. And, I got to do, with Desert Storm, I did a total of 11 tours in combat. And then near the end of my career, I was actually pulled out, me and 3 other guys from SOCOM, and we were branch detailed to the CIA. And it really didn't look like we were in the Army anymore. So we were blue badged case officers with the agency. So, and that was kind of the 11th tour in combat.
That's amazing. Great journey too. I have just graduated military science. I guess 1 and 2. I went to the basic camp at Fort Knox. I went home for like 2 weeks before Saddam invaded Kuwait. And I was with my dad, who was in the military, and he's like, this means you have to go. You better get ready to go. We're in upstate New York right now. They don't even know where I am. No one knows where I am right now. He said, yeah, you need to be ready to go. You signed a paper. You got to be ready to go at any time. And that's what clicked in my head. And a year later is when I went in reserves and then the active duty. So it was all balls rolling at that time.
That's great. Great story.
And of course, after you retired, you've seen the writing on the wall, what's happening in the veteran community, not just from our generation of veterans, but from all the way back to our uncles and grandfathers from Korea and Vietnam as well. As they get older,
oh man,
they're losing their battle with the demons. And of course, there's a lot within our generation that are doing it too, but different reasons and methodologies. Tell us how you came about thinking about and thought up Check Event.
So before I got out, we had about 6 months to transition and figure out what we wanted to be when we grow up. So during that time, I got invited to a concert out near Fort Bragg, and I wasn't doing anything else. So I'm like, I might as well go. So that night, there was a young Marja Marine who was really stressed out. I'd say he was in bad shape. And he presented a flag that he had raised and lowered in Marja, Afghanistan, to one of the guys at the show. Well, that night, later on, he completely lost his, composure and extremely upset. And everybody was flocking around him. What's going on? Well, that night, that Marine's battle buddy that he raised that flag with ended his life by suicide. So then as we went around the room, I wasn't saying anything. I was letting the talent and the management and a used car salesman and the young Marine talk, just kind of as a fly on the wall, like, what are these guys going to come up with? So it was, screw that. I'm going to do something. I'm going to affect 22. And then, we can go hunting and fishing and NASCAR and all of these other things. And the idea was we're going to take a handful of veterans at a time to an uplifting event or experience, and then look for some more veterans and do it again the next weekend, or fill in the blank with a temporary trip. So when I retired, I was actually the strategic plans officer for 5th Special Forces Group. And I had worked in 5th Group for 18 years straight. So I must have kept my boss happy and my language currency current. So they kept me around. But I say that to attest to, I'm probably the only one in the room that had any idea about a mission statement and an operational approach to get after a mission, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So when they finally went quiet, I'm just going to move this back so I'm out of this. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I thought of everything except for the setting sun. So is that better?
That's much better.
So I let them go all the way around it, and I was like, guys, your hearts are in the right spots, but that's the dumbest plan I ever heard of. In 2015, there was almost 23 million veterans. You can't take them all to a show. You can't take them all hunting and fishing. And even if you did, to think that temporary action or that uplifting good time is going to protect somebody from suicide is, in my opinion, and Rich, you'll find through this conversation, I love to say in my opinion, because whatever you say afterwards is no wrong answer, right?
Exactly.
So in my opinion, I mean, it can't make a tangible difference in this veteran's struggle with suicide, over the period of time. And at that point, I really didn't know what I know now about suicide and the psychology and risk and protective factors. I was just kind of going with my heart, like this doesn't make sense. But now that I have self-educated, what I learned about that model is it can actually be more hazardous to veterans who are in distress. Think about it. So if you are isolated and stressed out and don't want to do anything, really the only benefit that model gives our brothers and sisters is it gives them something to look forward to. The books will tell you that you're less likely to hurt yourself if you have something cool to look forward to. And that is something cool to look forward to, no doubt about it. But what happens afterwards? What happens the day after? These men and women go right back to the same situation and environment that put them in that situation to begin with, right? So, but now they don't have anything cool to look forward to. So it's not a stretch to connect the dots and say, wow, you're right. They could be more at risk. So I stuck with that organization for a couple of years. And I think a lot of lessons in my life I've learned from watching what right doesn't look like. You know what I mean? You learn by seeing the wrong way to do stuff to figure out, well, as long as I don't do that, I can do better than that. So I was at an event and it was a NASCAR event. This was with the old crew, and a guy in the entertainment industry was there with us. I had invited him out, and we were blessed that he came, and really no exposure to military anything, you know. So we were standing around, and a Gold Star mom came up. Of course, we're gonna straighten up. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. It just got real, you know. Now it's more serious. And he's standing there like, what is going on, in a bit of a fog. But after about 15 minutes, he turned around and walked off. And I'm like, that's not like this guy at all. He came back about an hour and a half later, and he apologized. And he said, I didn't know. I had no idea that this was a lady who lost her son in combat. And that, he said, it crushed him. He said he lost his shit and he walked off. So then he asked me that question. He says, is this the model I just described to you, the hunting and fishing and events? Is this how we get after veteran suicide? I'm like, no, man, this is stupid. He's like, all right, what would you do? I said, first, we have to raise awareness to veteran suicide. We have to put the scope and the scale of the problem out there. We got to talk about who's doing it, where they're doing it, how they're doing it, how old they are when they're doing it, so that we can get people thinking about veteran suicide. The next thing we have to do, and this is really a war of numbers, okay? We have to produce a series of calls to action to get people to want to be involved in their veterans' lives, okay? So let's motivate an army of 350 million people to look after the 18 million veterans that are left. Those are today's numbers. During the conversation, it was about 22 million. And then the last thing we got to do is we got to educate those people. Now that we've got them front row seat, they're caring about their veterans. We want people to put veterans inside of their circle so that they have a meaningful and routine relationship with these veterans. I said, brother, then we got to educate them on, you know, what are the signs and symptoms of suicide? And both of us being, you know, members of the service, we sat through a lot of suicide prevention classes. And one of my biggest takeaways was, if somebody gives you something that they really treasure and kind of follow it up with, I won't need it anymore, that's a huge, you know, red indicator light on the dashboard. But I don't think that most civilians would catch that if a friend of theirs says, hey, I want you to have my Beatles White Album. I won't need it anymore. You know, they'd be like, oh, that's great. So thanks for the album. So we have to educate them. And those three things is what I put out there. And he stepped to me. He's a big guy. He stepped to me and he grabbed me by the collar and he said, Michael, you have to do that. That'll work. So I stayed with the other organization for about another year until I objectively found, you know, misuse of funds. I pointed it out to the rest of the board. You know, I stayed with that organization because they were helping veterans, you know, albeit on a very small scale. But if you're helping veterans, then I'm all in to help too. And I really wanted to have my hand on the rudder of that organization to hopefully steer it in, you know, a better or more impactful way. So after that, I really didn't want anything to do with the nonprofit space, but I still had those ideas of raise awareness, call to action, and educate. And then years later, it was 2021, I was dating an actress and a filmmaker, And she was telling me about all this amazing, nonprofit work. And, she was, impacting millions of women's lives. And I was like, oh yeah, well, I had an idea one time. And I told her that approach. And then she said, Michael, you have to do that because that will work. And at that time, I was running my own contracting company. I was a fencing contractor, making a comfortable living. I took pride in employing people and creatively pleasing my customers. And my goal was always to exceed their expectations. But I really felt like that second call was a calling to me. And I felt like, okay, this is what God wants me to do right now. Because I had spent my whole military career, trying to get on that next trip, working my way to the next school or advancement. I hadn't really followed anybody other than my mentors. But now I really felt like I needed to follow this feeling in my gut, this calling that I felt was from God. And I hadn't built a fence since. I put my head down and I started to incorporate it. And the very first person that I told about the idea was former acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller. It didn't help that 20 years prior to that, he was my battalion commander. And then years later, while I was in the agency, we had several lines of operations that were crossing. So he knew me then, he knew me now. And love and respect for the guy. And I told him about it and he said, Michael, if you're gonna head that up and that's the way you're gonna do it, I'm standing by for you to tell me what to do. This whole conversation was over text, and honestly so humbled that I cried. You know what I mean? For a guy like that to say, yeah, man, I trust you and this will work and I'm here to help. So we got started and I really, Rich, two of the hardest lessons that I've learned in doing this now for 2 years is people that really can make a difference resource wise so far haven't, and the other thing is, it's very sad for me to say this, but most people don't care about veterans. They're quick to say, thanks for your service. And I believe they mean well by that. I don't think that they realize that a lot of veterans take that badly, like, hey, you're thanking me for my service. But then again, that kind of goes with wearing a hat that says you're a veteran. You're asking for some kind of attention, right? But then, so what I try to teach civilians is try to be interested in those service members, you know what I mean? But I see people thanking veterans for their service. And then as they turn to walk away, I think they feel better about themselves than the veteran does for their, 10 seconds of appreciation. So, to get around all that, I just kept grinding and struggling. And I did not want this to be a board of my friends or a mission of like-minded people. So after I got Chris Miller, I reached out to another friend of mine, and she was a psychiatric nurse, psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. I got it. So, I mean, she was the dean of the college, and then, in academia for years and years, and then decided to finish out her illustrious career right back down in the trenches, talking to me, not me, but talking to my brothers and sisters and trying to keep them safe from suicide. So we've assembled a team and we came up with an approach, and we've really stuck with that and just trying to grind and get attention. And whenever I'm on a show like yours, I can't thank you enough because you're helping me do the very first thing, and that's raise awareness to veteran suicide. And beyond that, in your intro, I love that you have the 988 number and the press 1 as an option. Okay. And I say press 1 as an option because I get it a lot, veterans in crisis who don't want the VA involved or be on a list or whatever. And so I say, well, what if you didn't press 1? You're still going to get to talk to somebody, but you're not going to be in that wheelhouse. You know what I mean? So I think that that's a good option to share with our brothers and sisters, but you're absolutely right. And the procedure is 988. And if you're a veteran, press 1. So just getting out and staying in the trenches. And we've produced a lot of public service announcements. And actually, the very first one, if you've been to our YouTube channel and you've watched one of 22, I think you'll find that it's pretty tough to watch. But I actually wrote that piece during that conversation with my entertainer friend at the NASCAR race. He's like, "What are you going to do? And then how would you do it?" So he loved it, and he's in film. And so that was really the first piece that we did. And I was like, okay, man, how is this going to work? You know, how do we get this out there? And how do we get people to watch it? And he was like, man, if you put that on YouTube, it's going to go viral. People are going to talk about it. It's so powerful that, it can't fail. But if you watched it, maybe you saw, surprisingly how few views that 1 of 22 has. And that really brings me back to the frustration of getting people to care about veterans. I've had people with huge followings on their social media start talking about Check a Vet and sharing and liking our stuff. And they're blown away by the crickets that their shares receive from their friends in their circle. And it's just that, one, I feel like these days, any nonprofit that's associated with veteran suicide, I'm almost like I'm guilty by association by all of the other ones that have come before me and, had difficulties, got into legal trouble or this and that. And for me, there's nothing more important to me than my name and my reputation. So accountability and transparency is absolutely critical to me and to Check a Vet as long as I'm in charge. So on our website, we actually disclose our entire ledger. It's not just the little postcard that the IRS wants me to show. I want people to see exactly where the money's coming and going, and that there is no room for impropriety, because I have to be a good custodian of people's hard-earned money as we get after preventing veteran suicide. You have to. I see a lot of the other big guys, and a frustration that I have is there are other nonprofits that caveat what they're doing with prevent veteran suicide. For example, dogs. I think every veteran that needs a dog should have a dog. But at the end of the day, that nonprofit is on a mission to give people dogs, not to end veteran suicide. Same with houses, same with the concerts and the shows and stuff. That's their wheelhouse. That's what they're trying to do. Check a Vet has actually attracted the efforts of 5 PhDs in mental health, psychology, counseling, and then psychiatric mental health. And if you can get all of those big brains in the same room without a fist fight breaking out, because they are so different, but they're trying to accomplish the same thing, you're accomplishing something. but these people believe in what we're doing and how we're trying to do it. So the three things: raise awareness, call to action, and educate. That's really what our national campaign is. We produce public service announcements that are on our YouTube channel, which is Check a Vet at 365. And we want those to get out there as part of the education piece and the call to action piece. I think the second piece that I wrote was, what is your veteran suicide IQ? And I did that from asking people in my circle, because now I was in it. I was in the game, passionate about it. It's all I do. I work 6-7 days a week, up to 70 hours a week. And this is it. This is my life. So as I try to show people the raise awareness portion of veteran suicide, it'd be like, how many veterans do you think have ended their life, have ended their own life since 9/11? And I think we were in and about between 5 and 20,000. Okay. That was the standard answer that I got. What drove me to write that piece was I asked my psychologist with the VA, who's very interested in what we're doing. I asked him that number. I even told him, to put it into context, there's been 7,000, since December. There's just over 7,000 U.S. service members and contractors who have died in combat since 9/11. So that's let's compare veteran suicide to that. And a PhD working with the VA came back and he said 5,000. So I'm like, oh my God. So let's do a piece that's going to put out there how bad the problems are. And to talk about the number, 2 weeks ago, I was invited to brief the Kentucky State Legislature. They asked for 3 nonprofits to come up. And I accepted the invitation, but I asked to go last because I wanted to see what everybody else was going to say. And in addition to the 3 nonprofits, the state VA reps were there, and the governor's challenged VA reps. These are really the point people heading the state of Kentucky's veteran operations and veteran suicide stuff. And I sat there, and they were using numbers from 2014 to 2017. I'm like, what is this stuff? What are you guys even doing? And part of my brief is, if you Google how many veterans have ended their life by suicide since 9/11, what you'll come up with is 30,177. I even did a commercial on NPR with that because that's the information that's out there. I literally spent about 18 months before I stumbled upon a spreadsheet on a VA website that was under about 5 other web pages that were fairly confusing. In fact, when I go back to find this and show other people, sometimes it still takes me 10 to 15 minutes to find it. It's like a labyrinth, right? But after 18 months, boom, there it is. And calculator in one hand and the spreadsheet in the other. I did the math, and the other nonprofits were using that number, 30,177. So before I even started talking, I said to all of the legislature, I said, I can guarantee you, when we're done with this, you're going to be more educated on veteran suicide. And so on my slide, I showed, what's the Google number? What's the VA's number? Does the VA even have a number? Like, has anybody heard of the VA's number of veteran suicide? No, they haven't. But then I put up on the slide, which is their math from their spreadsheet. Rich, it's 127,560.
Insane.
That's the VA's number. So I think most veterans have learned to take what the VA puts out with a grain of salt, or in some cases, a bucket of salt. And I use the VA, and I try to be, I try to give good advice to people who are struggling with the VA. If you're not happy, tell them you want somebody else until you are happy. So I'm not here to bash the VA or anybody else. I'm just here to share what I've learned. Okay. So there is an organization called the American Warrior Partnership. They are a nonprofit, an amazing one at that. And they were given a $3.5 million grant from Bristol Myers Squibb.
Wow.
Which was a little curious to me, because I would think that a pharmaceutical company would just want to keep selling drugs, right?
Yeah.
Which is what they're doing now. So kudos, mad respect to Bristol Myers Squibb. So they invested in AWP, and it was an investment to see how bad is the problem. Let's raise awareness to veteran suicide by figuring out how bad is this problem. So AWP actually, they kept their hands clean in a brilliant way. They used portions of the money to subcontract the University of Alabama, and they looked at 8 states over 5 years, starting in tiny communities, counties, cities, and metropolitan areas in 8 states over 5 years. And what they found was the VA's numbers were underreported by a factor of 2.4. And most of those were because of self-inflicted mortality. And most of those were drug overdoses. If you kill yourself with drugs, it's not considered a suicide. Even though by looking at the toxicology report, you can see if somebody was trying to get high or swinging for the fence. Are you following me? So underreported by a factor of 2.4. Well, that just turned 127,560 into 306,000.
Wow.
Then, but wait, it gets worse. You know, man, I used to pride myself on being an action guy. And for me and my buddies, we teasingly, and no disrespect to anybody, we call ourselves former action guys. Facts. That's what it is, right? And being an action guy was all about getting the job done, going out on the battlefield or leading men, or, you know, pulling in targets. But Rich, I went from that. I would classify myself these days as a ginormous data nerd. Okay. I just want to know. I want to find things like I found on the VA. I want to read all the stuff. And as I read about Operation Deep Dive and AWP, you know, in their methodology reports, they actually had to exclude portions of veterans. Okay. Because they didn't have all the social security numbers that the VA had, nor would anybody share it with them. So how are you going to tell if somebody's a veteran if you don't have their social security numbers? Some of those 8 states actually wanted to charge AWP up to $16,000. Yeah. And think about the work that they're doing. This work is for humanity. This work is for national treasure, our veterans.
Right.
We didn't want to share it.
Yeah.
And then the worst part was, their worst constraint was before 1973 or thereabouts, the DOD had a very poor record-keeping management system. And as most older veterans will know, there was a huge fire, I think it was in Indianapolis, that burned up a lot of our records. Okay. So AWP had to exclude veterans who were 65 and over. Okay. Because they couldn't tell who was a veteran and who wasn't, even if they knew their social security number. So now, what portion of veteran suicides do veterans 65 and over account for? 40%.
40%.
So now let's add, and this is my math. This is me looking into the problem and me really trying to wrap my mind around what is it. And that bumps it up to like 388,000 veterans.
Wow.
There's only 400,000 graves in Arlington. So this problem since 9/11 could nearly fill Arlington, a national cemetery since the Civil War.
Wow.
Yeah. And when that number came out, the first number, 30,177, it was a Brown University study. I just want to talk to this real quick so that there's no confusion at all. There was a theologian who was writing a paper on mental health and veteran suicide. So in my opinion, maybe he was writing outside of his wheelhouse a little bit because he was not writing about religion. And in this report, it reported the 30,177. But kind of buried in the middle of it is these are post 9/11 veterans. So if you joined the military before 9/11, you don't count. So like if you were one of the leaders into the wars on terror, you don't count. They were only counting the men and women who joined after 9/11. And it was very unclear. So since Memorial Day, Chris Miller actually hired us a PR firm to take advantage of the news cycle and veterans. And man, I probably did 20 interviews, and I'd never turned a single one down. And I never really even cared about what they were going to ask me. Because if I'm not good enough at my job to answer a question about veteran suicide, then I need to do better. But I actually got an op-ed published on Fox News.
Wow.
And so they were giving their spiel while my op-ed was rolling beneath what they were saying. And this was like the national correspondent on DOD and veteran issues for Fox News.
Wow.
Rich, I was mortified because you want to know what number they were using on top of my op-ed?
30,000.
30,000. I was like, I'm so honored to finally make it on the Fox News. But like that, you know what I mean? That's the first thing I'm trying to do is set the record straight, show people what's going on, scare people as to what's going on, teach them what to do, or whatever it takes, whatever I have to do to try to get people involved in veterans' lives and break down that isolation that can tragically lead to suicide. It can be as simple as that. And really, that's the model that worked for me, Rich. As I got out of the Army, I did 26 years. I was in Special Forces for 22 and 11 tours in combat and some time with the CIA. I went from all of that to literally putting a dent in my bed, right? Loss of identity, loss of purpose. We hear those two things a lot.
Yeah.
The thing we don't hear a lot is loss of that camaraderie. You just spent however long you were in the service, you were a part of a team, right? And now you're not on that team anymore. I didn't want to answer my phone. All I wanted to do was find that next Netflix series with as many episodes as possible so I can, you know what I mean?
Disappear.
I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to be left alone. I would get super anxious when my phone would ring. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I was isolating. But my neighbors saw that I was absent. They noticed that I was no longer in the circle. So they came over and they checked on their veteran. They checked on a veteran, and that veteran was me. And they didn't announce themselves, and we were good enough friends. They did the 2-second knock and then walked in. They gave me tough love, Rich. They're like, man, when's the last time you cleaned this place up? And if we've seen people who are depressed or suffering from anxiety, I wasn't bathing. The only thing I cared about was getting through the day so that it could be nighttime and then I could sleep like all the other people. Right. So they were giving me tough love. Clean your place up, shave, get cleaned up. But then they were also giving me love, right? Hey, we're going to be back in 10 minutes. We're going to go for a ride on the pontoon boat. We're going to grab some lunch. And you're coming with us. And I think that this is a key to getting people involved in veterans' lives. If you're always asking a veteran, hey, would you like to? Or why don't you come over sometime? You know, we're used to being told what to do, right? I know I am. So when they would say, we're coming back and you're coming with us, I was like, okay, I'm coming with you. And now I'm back on a team. I'm back on their team. And they got me out of that. They got me out of that dungeon or out of that dark spot, which just so happened to be a beautiful houseboat on Kentucky Lake. Like, how do you feel sorry for yourself in that situation? I don't know, but I certainly found a way. You know what I mean? But that love really gave me the model for check a vet. And in the beginning, before I knew, what I know now about suicide and suicide prevention and suicide risk factors and protective factors, I'm not a smart guy, buddy. It is what worked for me. Break down isolation, replace it with companionship. If you choose, replace it with fellowship. I said, let's pull back the camouflage. Let's be better neighbors and replace stuff with fellowship, right? So that made a difference for me. And I thought that if we did nothing more than that, then we could make a difference for our brothers and sisters. But now, I mean, as I'm so passionate about it, and I'm so blessed to be surrounded by people, whose lives are in education and in mental health and suicide prevention. I'm a sponge, man. I'm learning all I can, because that's how important this job is. That's how important this mission is. And then I look around and, like, you saw us at NASCAR. What do you think? There was probably 300 other vendors there.
Yeah, at least.
And maybe 30 or 40 of them were nonprofits.
Yeah, a good bit right in the same corner, and they put you all the group basically in that same wave.
Did you see anybody getting after veteran suicide?
No, not at all. I've seen one MTSU giving out flyers about what MTSU gives for your students.
And that's part of what we do too. As we try to educate, there's takeaways. Here's some flyers. Go to the website, checkavet.org, and you can see what we're doing. You can learn that right on the back of our trailer. It's so impactful. I don't know if you could pop up a picture of that or not. But it says, veteran suicide is preventable. Learn how at checkavet.org. That's a prolific statement, right? We got the whole first year was so frustrating to me, Rich, because I had classified myself as a successful person in the military, but I couldn't make anything work in this nonprofit space. I couldn't raise funds. I couldn't do any good. So it seemed. What was I talking about right before that? I'm sorry, TBI.
I lost you too. So I was trying to look at the comments and listen to you at the same time.
I know that got me too.
That's from Jake Holland in Kentucky. He's thank you, Chief, fixing to share this with the EOD community. We are experiencing an epidemic of suicide, and then he just invited you to his house in Kentucky as well.
I'm there, buddy, and I'm there for your brothers and sisters. As much as I can. So no, I was talking about the takeaways and giving the education. And evidently I've done a fairly good job self-educating, because as I mentioned, I was invited to the Kentucky State Legislature, and I was very well received. Chairman Walker Thomas of that committee came up and gave me 10 minutes of his time. And I was so honored to have that. What validation to our mission. And another thing I was talking about is, during the first year, it was hard for me because I had been used to success from my military career. but every wall that I ran into knows, and it was tough. I mean, it was tough to hear that from my friends, to hear that from my family, who I know have money, no help. So Progressive Insurance kept reaching out via email, and I was kind of setting myself up for another no. And an executive called me up and said, "Hey, we heard about you. I want to know more. Fill this thing out." So my motto has always been, I will fly, drive, run, walk, or crawl to anybody who wants to help. So I filled out the paperwork. I thought for sure I was wasting my time, Rich. Thought for sure. But if it could help, I want to tee up some success. I want to tee up some help. So I had been sponsored for a program called Keys to Progress. Okay. And Keys to Progress gives like 100 economical vehicles to soldiers and veterans in need. But then they also give 10 commercial vehicles to veteran nonprofits predominantly, who they feel are doing the right thing. And you have to be nominated to get into the program. You can't just self-nominate or like, dun dun dun, look at all this great stuff that I'm doing. So we got nominated, and I filled out the paperwork. Same guy calls me. He was calling me, and I was like half dodging his calls, expecting more of the same. Seriously, right? How many times can you get punched in the face before it's like, all right, this is hurting now? So I took his call, and he's like, give me your elevator speech. I didn't even make it through my elevator speech, and this guy's like, hey man, this is great stuff. I want to meet you. I want to meet you on November 10th because we're giving you a truck, right? Wow. First, it was a Secretary of Defense. Next, it's the Dean of the college, the mental health college. And now Progressive Insurance believes in what me and this amazing team are doing so much. They gave us a brand new F-250 four-wheel drive diesel, plus an $8,000 wrap, plus a bunch of accessories. But what was even more touching was the big box of handwritten cards from the employees that loved what we were doing.
And it's a badass truck if you ever get to see it on the road or at a presentation he's doing. You'll know the truck when you see it. It's badass and very easy to see and not hard to miss.
But on the very back of this, I'm so cautious because, man, the last thing I want somebody to do is see what we're doing and get upset and hurt themselves, right? Like, how terrible is that? The gun's blowing up in your face.
Right.
On the back of the truck, it says veteran suicide is preventable. Learn how at checkavet.org. So right after we got the truck, we were invited. We did the Nashville Ruck Run, which is Operation Stand Down and Creative Vets. Creative Vets, Rich Casper is a friend. He was the one that nominated us. And thank you again, Rich, if you're listening. And so after that, we actually got invited to Kid Rock's Honky Tonk. And there was a Green Beret Foundation doing an event there on Veterans Day. And they let us park the truck right out in the middle of the street.
Nice.
And right on Broadway. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
We weren't in the middle. We were right in front of the thing. But one of the 10 times that I went down there to look at the truck and make sure I didn't have a ticket or it's got a boot on it or it's hauled off. Rich, I saw this guy behind the truck and he was crying his eyes out, man. Right?
Right.
So I went down there and cried with him. And I said, you've lost somebody to suicide, haven't you? And he had lost his brother, who was a veteran. And I said, how does that statement make you feel? Do you agree with that? Do you hate me for putting it on your on this truck? Or how does this make you feel? Because you have suffered this loss. I can't go back in time and change it, but I'm trying to help other people. So how do you feel about that statement? He said, you're absolutely right. I only wish I had done more. I only wish I had answered the phone, given him more of my time, done more, been there more, but I wasn't. And now every day I live in the wake of that tragedy. Wow, right? And suicide being preventable, that's not some guy who came up with a neat idea to try to save and passion to save veterans' lives. That's not me saying that. It's the World Health Organization. It's the CDC. It's the VA. It's anybody with a mental health diploma who's opened a book, and that's the way they talk about suicide. They look at each suicide as an individual act, and it's preventable. You just have to have a strategic approach and care and be involved in that person's life. It's really important. So, that's what we're doing, and we're grinding. Last year we got invited to Sturgis. It was our first really big event. There's between 500,000 and 700,000 attendees at Sturgis, and of those, a really big portion of those are veterans. But what's unique about Check-A-Vet is, yes, we want veterans to do the right thing, and most of the time we already are. But our targeted demographic is people with veterans in their lives. So really, I'm trying to get after the guys that came to these events, NASCAR, fill in the blank, Sturgis, whatever. I want to educate them. I want to call to action them. I want to get them more involved in those veterans' lives. So by doing those big events, like you saw us at NASCAR, NASCAR's got 35 million fans worldwide, and self-reportedly, they say 40% of them are veterans and service members. Let's pause and go back to the raise awareness piece. We already talked about a number. How many people are doing it? Up to 388,000. Probably at least the 306,000 that AWP came up with. But who's doing it? Male or female? 90% of veteran suicides are by men. How old are they? Because as I study this and as I learn new things about it, one of the biggest aha moments was I really thought that veteran suicide was more younger veterans accounted for more suicides. So they have a little bit higher rate. When you say rate of suicide, that would be how many incidents of suicide there are in a population of 100,000. Okay. So there's, by the VA in 2020, it was like 34, whereas right behind them is 32. So is there a ginormous difference in the rate? No. Veterans 35 and over account for about 86% of veteran suicides. So we're talking older men. Now let's talk about demographics. I think it's about 90% of veteran suicides. This is young and old. 90% are men, and they're white. So I've explained this to some people, and they want to ride a racial divide as to what we're trying to accomplish. Like this message is for everybody, but in unraveling falsehoods or false narratives, we have to know who's doing it. It's older white males. Where are they doing it? Predominantly in rural areas. Look around Kentucky, right? Most places that NASCAR goes is surrounded by a rural area. And then how do they do it? It's firearms. Over 62.5% of veteran suicides are by firearms, which in my opinion is a knee-jerk reaction by not just this administration. It's the VA's approach to preventing veteran suicide. Their number one priority is lethal means safety. Lock up your guns. And I think, I'm not a really good public speaker. I probably get a little better all the time, but I do understand, know your audience, right? And when you start telling veterans, hey, I'm going to take your guns away, you need to take your guns away from yourself, you need to lock it up, you shouldn't trust yourself with a gun, I think you lose your credibility with that audience because you don't understand the veteran culture. Okay. Guns are a part of what we do. It was our job, and for a lot of veterans, they cling to their guns, and whatever it takes to not have their guns taken away, that's what they're going to do. So I love analogies, and I think being a skydiver and a military free fall guy, I kind of liken this priority one is locking up your guns to me jumping out of an airplane from 25,000 feet and setting my parachute on top of a ladder just above the ground, thinking that I can put it on before I hit the ground, right? The time to think about veteran suicide is not when our brother or sister is reaching for the gun. You have to get upstream about it. You have to figure out, like you saw in the Skyline video, suicide is not the problem. And I love to have that discussion with older psychologists because they're so ingrained in what they've taught, what they believe. Now, just follow me for a second. Suicide's not the problem. Suicide's a symptom. The problem is whatever the thing is that's stressing that veteran out, be it addiction, be it financial struggles, relationship, legal, health, fill in the blank. Figure out, get involved in your veterans' lives. Figure out what's stressing them out. If you get after that and you treat that and you help them find help to address that, then the suicide never happens. It's a symptom. So change the way we look at suicide. What? Yeah, it is preventable. You just have to figure out what you're doing. And then again, to talk about guns. Yeah, I know the data. I know the facts, the VA's facts, the CDC's, all that. But as everybody, in that veteran suicide, government wheelhouse is saying, lock up your guns. I love to have this conversation with him, Rich. I'm like, the worst state in the nation for veteran suicide the last 2 years is Wyoming. The state of Wyoming has a veteran suicide rate of 80. According to the CDC, the civilian rate is about 13.5. 80, right? So what if I could tell you about a population of people in America that spans east to west and north to south, border to border, with a suicide rate of 90. And oh, by the way, I can pretty much guarantee you that not one of those suicides was done with a firearm. You could see smoke coming out of their ears, like, not possible. It is possible. It's the incarcerated population of America. Okay. If somebody decides that they're going to hurt themselves, a gun is just an easy way out. And I understand and I agree with putting time between somebody who's stressed out. The facts show from studying suicide from people who committed suicide, they didn't kill themselves, but they decided to kill themselves and tried. They spend on average between 5 and 20 minutes putting it together and doing it. So if you can slow it down where a person can't get to their drugs or firearms or whatever for that portion of time, that's good. And what I try to tell my brothers and sisters is what worked for me when I was super stressed out. I came home from my first SF deployment and my first wife said, "You want to know what I want for my birthday? I want a divorce."
Oh, wow.
Complete tailspin. You know what I mean? Tailspin. So I knew at that point in time, I wasn't in a good headspace, right? So if we feel like we're not in a good headspace, let's protect us from the thing that we might hurt ourselves with. I put all my guns in my safe. I locked it and I tossed the key in the backyard. I knew where it was. They were still mine, but I didn't have that impulsive availability to it when it really mattered, right? We don't have to leave our guns locked up all the time. But man, if you're struggling with something, be smart and protect yourself in so many different ways. And here's an idea. If you have people involved in your lives daily, let's be in their presence. Let's let them know that we're struggling, right?
Definitely.
So it's not guns. And you know, frustratingly, the second priority for preventing veteran suicide is better critical care. So like when you do try to commit suicide, you shouldn't say commit suicide. When you do try to end your life by suicide and fail, well, those doctors that we just invested billions in could probably bring you back to life. Like what? No. You have to get upstream, like I'm saying. You have to figure out that risk factor that's stressing somebody out and strategize how to turn it into a protective factor. That's what it's all about.
Definitely. And you laid a lot of knowledge on the audience tonight. And I had to leave About Face Radio, sent them a message, telling them to jump on YouTube so they can still see it. But
Right.
you put a lot of knowledge out to veterans and first responders that listen to the show. That's the majority of the audience. And I think what you're doing at Check a Vet is paramount to stopping this epidemic that we have right now. This is worse than anything that the news made out of COVID. This is way worse than that. And when this all came out, the 22 a day, it was really the Vietnam veterans that were making that number that high at that time. And a lot of people didn't want to recognize that. And I'm glad that you put that out right away. And that's one of the first things me and you talked about at the racetrack was the age and the demographics of those who were losing. And it's the older white males. And it's amazing the work that you've put into this in just, you said 2 years, right? In 2 years, you put so much time, effort, and data mining. Like you said, when I was in service, I hated data. I hated having to do any reports. But now I kind of do data because I know it's needed. You need to have data. You need to give numbers to people in order for them to understand. A lot of people need that picture with numbers. And I'm so grateful that we were able to have this conversation and have that conversation at NASCAR last week. Jake Holland chimed in after you said that when you came home and your wife has said, "What I want for Christmas is divorce." He said, "I feel your pain." Had 2 wives that did that to him. So, but he's still with us. And he's landed on his feet with his current wife, Mickey. And she keeps him grounded, I believe, keeps him grounded, keeps him from causing harm to himself, doing anything dumb. But again, Michael, thank you for coming on. And what's a great way for people to get in contact with you or the organization?
Hey, go to checkavet.org. I hope I've generated some interest in what we're doing. Go to checkavet.org. Don't believe me. Go and look for yourself. If you believe in what we're doing, help us out, because the greatest idea in the world, without the resources to share it and the resources to implement it, just ends up being the greatest idea in the world stuck on a web page somewhere.
Definitely.
And also go to our social media, like us and share us. That is the generation that we're in. So help us raise awareness. But then be on the lookout, because we have an initiative right now to prevent veteran suicide at the community level, which is really where we're going to make our biggest inroads. And that's a peer-to-peer style support group for veterans struggling with suicide. Think about how effective AA is for addicts, right? It's the same thing. It's not just going to be for suicide. It's really bringing veterans together, but also an Al-Anon style meeting. And we're hoping to create a proof of concept in Western Kentucky. And once we build it, I want to give it to everybody. Give it to the state. If they do well, give it to the nation. But I think that having that base of support around our veterans, 365, whenever they need it, they've got it. So that's our biggest initiative that we're working on now. while we're still doing the national awareness piece. And I'm so thankful for you. I know we're a little long. I'm so thankful for you, Rich, for having us on. And whenever you would like to talk more or talk about other things, I'm always available to you.
Heck yeah, I'd like to invite you to come back on Veterans Day week, one of my 3 shows that week, to see where you are that week and maybe get a little deeper into this, get more people involved.
Oh, that's great, because we certainly do need the help from a resource standpoint, but it'll come. It'll come.
I'm sure it will. Again, thank you for taking some of your time on this Independence Day to hang out with me instead of going and watching fireworks.
I do love fireworks.
You have a good one, Michael.
Hey, God bless you. I really appreciate you, Rich.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks for checking us out and being a part of the Misfit Nation. Don't forget to visit our website at themisfitnation.com. It's themisfitnation.com to catch up on all of our episodes and also to get some of that great Misfit Nation gear. As always, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling, because we are Fit Nation.